Hello everyone, today we talk about coming to terms with the acceptability of war. I've taken a bit of a more philosophical turn recently, not really by schedule or by, intentionally, but simply because sometimes I come up with these ideas. And this one is, powerful as you understand, and I feel the need to explain this point from a channel that fundamentally deals with warfare, as you understand, from one side from a properly historical point of view, from the other making a bit sense of a theory, chiefly of the art of war through von Clausewitz, but also and especially through the broader need, let's say, the broader use that we have to consider war, and naturally also the eventuality we may get involved and we in one, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to war, but just wherever you come from, your military is shooting at someone. Even if they don't tell you it's happening, right? And therefore you belong in a way or another to this war, to this state, and it goes beyond. It's something human, properly, right? Conflict is innate within us. It's actually the same thing that makes us move and react with reality. War is something very different from conflict, as we explained many times. But it's obvious that discussing these points, as you understand, I have this, proclivity to address. If you want the not much with a shock effect, because I don't, but maybe with a bit of emphasis and stressing the almost surprising aspects of the human character of war, right? I can start a video in which I'm trying to ideally, support the idea that war is not unavoidable, but it can be used at all times, right? Because the acceptability is very different from the unavoidability. And actually, I'm against the unavoidability of war, because that means not properly understanding war is always avoidable, right? There's not really a point where you can't say this thing had to happen. As for basically everything in life, in history, right? Pretending that something has to happen anyway, even when it's unavoidable in the sense, think about mortality, right? In human existence, death is surely unavoidable, but still makes a big deal of difference. First of all, because when we're dead, we can't do much about that anymore. But we have, even till the last moment, we really have no idea what it's gonna be like and what we can do before, right? To leave a mark, to make a difference. So this could easily take a more properly philosophical, even mathematical turn. That is to say, this tendency towards the infinite, this asymptotic view of existence, that at the end of the day is in fact a very physical evidence, right? It's something that the saying von Clausewitz uses and so on. But obviously I can't address a topic like this by immediately starting, as I already did, by the way, considering that war is probably one of the single most human things, and uniquely human things actually ever, right? Yes, animals fight, but it's not quite war in the way we intend properly. And it's easy there to trace parallelisms, but it's not quite the same. That's also another mistake. Today we will take fundamentally a look at various positions and try to make a point, yes, against them, but for understanding why these positions in the first place are there, right? And therefore solving this preconception, right? This prejudice, this taking of position that actually damage people exactly when war is eventually going to be concerned. And it's a difficult task. What I was saying before is essentially that probably one of the greatest boundaries, one of the greatest divides, differences I suspect to own with, not with the audience here necessarily, but it happens sometimes, right? Then somebody said, you know what, I like your content. Sometimes, however, I disagree with certain ideas. The question is, I suspect that aside from, what I can emerge from political positions, and this is a very political one. Now, I can't digress with every single thing I say, but, if you're not a regular follower, if you've never listened to me talking about war or anything, you may find certain statements surprising, whereas these are all things we explain in the channel, right? Especially in the von Clausewitz playlist, but not only, because it's how we interpret history here altogether, right? War is political. War is a political act, right? And it's just an instrument of political will. That's the view we own on the Clausewitzian pattern. And therefore, I suspect strongly that most of, the perplexity that this channel can arise, in a sense, and I've seen it. Now, I'm thinking randomly, just one example the other day, there was somebody who commented on one of my videos that probably had nothing to do with the Crusades, but I guess because the video was medieval themed, this guy posted this stuff. It wasn't a criticism, it wasn't aggressive or anything. Basically linked an article that was substantially coming. No, I won't say the team about that, but the broader philosophy, broader take was, war is made fundamentally by overly emotional or violent, exalted people that cause problems for all others. That sounds like quite of a culturalist position that even now we don't have fully the time to explain. I would like to make this all limpid without addressing in detail certain ideological positions that at some point we will have to cope with. Some of you asked me, why don't you talk about culturalism? Why don't you explain to us why von Clausewitz is incompatible with such readings of history? Well, that's, for example, a very powerful answer. Question, because and of course the answer should be as powerful as punching, not because of the what I'm going to explain, but simply because it's been asked as a question. The fact that sometimes rarely, right, because there are a few people who overall become explicit on these topics that ask me, I've heard that von Clausewitz, was cool, but, I like Little Heart, and yeah, the question is, Little Heart was fundamentally a charlatan, and this has nothing to do with whether you actually acknowledge that. You're not an idiot because maybe you've heard that this guy wrote interesting stuff and therefore you believe he's an authority. The problem is beyond you and goes about the reasons why what is the context where you've been raised, the background, the broader culture. Here we're talking about a global one, or at least here we mostly a Western perspective. You could possibly even came to think that Little Heart could be a competent military theorist and being even in the position of pretending to criticize something from the Clausewitzian work. Simple comparisons can be done, and I don't know, people who believe that actually Sun Tzu is a big deal in terms of modern military of strategic culture, let's put it in this way, and maybe they don't know who von Clausewitz is. The same goes for the people who read von Clausewitz fundamentally don't know much about him, that misunderstand him. These are also things we always discuss in polemical terms, but never quite address. We talked here and there about, yes, I think we made a video in which we were analyzing not culturalism proper, but broader mistakes done still by it indirectly in that video. And so if you're a regular follower, I think you already got that kind of explanation, that kind of tools of interpretation of the question. But it's obvious that the greatest prejudice we battle against here is fundamentally rooted in a broader lack of strategic culture whatsoever, right? The examples we just made are just little epiphenomena of a broader, and complete, I would say sometimes, disorientation in terms of historical, civic, even scientific matters, right? That cover humanity, broadly speaking. So I can't solve the problem. Sorry, it doesn't. I don't reach that kind of range of capability, but I can make some point on what is the necessity of considering war on more serious grounds, because even dialectically speaking, the problem is often this one, that everybody, by acknowledging that war is a terrible thing, come to the immediate logical conclusion that therefore we shouldn't do it, and therefore it's bad, right? Which is not properly a logical conclusion, instead. And it even adds to it fundamentally, it demonizes fundamentally an activity that doesn't speak for the intentions of the same, right? It's the example I often make is like violence in terms of, I don't know, here it gets tough even to make examples, because I know you can't get to one point, we can criticize both things, but let's say that, and that's why it's not a strictly military problem. Think about the use of violence between, I don't know, a terrorist and a paramilitary police, right? Now, you may side for maybe the terrorist, right, at some point, depending who it is. I'm sure there are people out there, and it's not just the most banal example, more recent, I don't know, Islamic terrorism that has afflicted the West in the last years. It can be everything. It can be era. It can be terrorism. Because what is terrorism at the end of the day, right? Every mean is legit when you have to win a war, and this is already something that is very difficult to explain, because when it comes to moral grounds, people tend to confuse aims with means, right? Von Clausewitz is very clear about this, that the proceedings of war are not human, right? And with this statement, right, if you disagree with this fundamental, it's not even a core view, but it's simply stemming from the point that we're trying to make today, that is, you have to be flexible fundamentally in scientific terms to determine what is the point you're getting at, right? Because I can tell you just by my personal background, I tend not to side with terrorists, but exactly for this reason, I can say I don't give a damn about the motivations that stand between certain acts. Because at the end of the day, it's an act of violence. It doesn't matter against who is addressed, right? Here we're, if there is a valid lesson that we can learn from military history, is that every kind of, morals in wars, in terms of kind of a ritualized or kind of negotiated form of it, it's something that can happen fundamentally for political reasons, that is to say, in fact, those who bring to violence being enacted. But the rule of war proper, that is the military rules, let's say, out there, is that there are no rules of that kind, that the constant objective in war is to put the enemy in a condition of inferiority that stems not from an absolute value, but from a relative one. That's also why war is asymmetric by definition. There is no such thing like symmetric warfare. There can be warfare that are more or less symmetric, that is, they're more or less similar to each other, but there is no fixed standard out there for you to say, okay, there is something like, a standard way of war, and this entails the same means, right, through which this is used. So I understand that also most people who follow me are from a certain side of the aisle. All right, I can't say I'm probably exaggerating it in a sense, but I believe that my contents attract mostly conservative-leaning users. It's plenty of liberals. It's plenty of even more left and more right, for that matter. I think it's actually more balanced than it seems. But I get the impression that even when I touch these aspects, there is a bit of a fixed more moralistic, not moral, but moralistic standard for which even discussing this war in these terms becomes very difficult to explain. Right. The point I make in today's video is mostly directed against fundamentally pacifistic positions, because at that point, if you are against war and you can't accept the fact that war is an option, I won't say war exists. Again, war is unavoidable. That is not properly true, because that's already shifting the problem on a completely different and actually wrong conceptual level, right? Because in order, and that's also why, by the way, I think the topic is easier today, because in my opinion, it's much easier to convince a pacifist of the acceptability of the exercise of violence in certain circumstances than it is for a militarist, for a nationalist to let's say convince them that there is something even in there that doesn't work as a useful approach to reality. Why is this the case? Because pacifists fundamentally would like the absence of something. A militarist, whichever his reasons are here, through the ethno-nationalistic cause, which is, let's be honest, mostly overlapping with those positions, but don't think that pacifists are actually immune, even if they do not acknowledge those positions either, then actually at least take into consideration, and they are more evolved in this regard, even though, still quite poorly, I mean, considering an intellectual average, or at least what it should be, at least the employment of the military instrument, right? And they often also see better kind of the idea that at that point war is not just a matter of individual inclinations, but fundamentally it encompasses people's countries. So I must say that even personally speaking, I passed, of course, through the latter phase, not because I've ever been a militarist, because I never properly liked certain positions, not even nationalism, because even if I could go close to certain positions of that kind, it was mostly an emotional thing. It was I would say not necessarily normal, but at a certain age, a lot of young people have similar ideas, and I believe, broadly speaking, even the most moderate people in the world have fundamentally been there, right? Contemplated the idea, having winked at it in some way, or at least sometimes let others do that, right? What we often say is that with war, it's not much about whether you do it or not. Sometimes even not making war is actually criminal, or at least the consequences are pretty much the same, because even what is criminal, as we were saying before, what is terroristic, and what is victory and what is defeat, we dedicated an important amount of attention to this problem. We have seen that these things are fundamentally subjective and they always change, right? So I won't be repeating myself, but this may be yet another difference, barrier, a problem of understanding if you come from other standards. Because this is a problem coming from standards that one puts together at some point in their life, fundamentally thinking they are what the problem is about, and not developing further on them, and therefore disagreeing with positions that maybe they have not even conceived to be possible. And that is a bit the problem of humans in general, that whatever is different and new is, and you don't understand fundamentally, you immediately tend to oppose it. Then when you finally manage to integrate it, to frame it into your mind, you say, oh wow, now I know the cool thing, and the other, what you were before seems to you pretty dumb. that is, for especially for people who, fortunately for them, have done this, made this passage quite often, so that they have accumulated a bit of an experience of this point, should be pretty well known. But I presume most people do not even acknowledge, rationalize this passage, and they therefore presume that at some point whatever they know is the standard, what should be known, and that there can't be other boundaries to be pushed profitably, justly, like. The acceptability of war is difficult, of course, also in an historically understandable world, right? It's obvious that after World War II, so the horrors of totalitarianisms, the Holocaust, and also during the following generations with the Cold War, and therefore even the threat of, let's say, the extinction of the human race. The idea of war has been always seen fundamentally as pushed to those extremes. That is to say, humans fundamentally, by making war, destroy, this is a bit the narrative, themselves in toto, right? They can't basically wipe each other out, and that's stupid. In there is a little mistake, that is, humans, I don't know if you notice, but as far as also other animals, right, they tend to destroy the world they live in, or at least they tend to physically augment the chaos, exhaust energy, and therefore bring into what the universe seems to be heading to, that is a thermic death, right? So the idea that humans do stuff and therefore that's kind of bad, is to think of even about environmentalist positions. Right, whatever humans do basically is bad. So, end of the story. It's better if humans actually extinguish themselves rather than leaving nature. Nature would do the same thing, right? Well, of course, we would accelerate that brutally. We would cause pain. We would, definitely. There is, I care actually about environmental issues, but as you understand, just from this position, I do it in a way that is aimed at a pragmatical ratio. Right, I'm pretty concerned actually for, especially water pollution, for example, way more than climate change, frankly, and I don't think people actually care about that. They right do. But I try to do it on a, let's say, I'm not an expert on these issues, so my opinion can be, has the value it has, but I would like to point out that, of course, war, in the broader mistake of that position, is properly not something more or less destructive, if not in interest of time, like that is not quantitatively but maybe qualitatively, and that is also debatable at some levels. And of course, it is something that impresses more. I mean, emotionally, we are definitely more impacted by, it's understandable, by war than by even, a climate change. Now we were talking about it because that's something that spans over a much, a larger amount of time, but it's not necessarily less destructive altogether. War is a sort of testing ground. We have seen this for cognitive reasons through the Clausewitzian theory, that is, war is the best ground where humans fundamentally are faced with the greatest, this balance of greater threat and lesser time and resources to solve the situation. So basically, it's possible. It's in terms of human society's commitment, the moment at which mankind is faced with the highest need of practicality, rationality, pragmatism, and naturally put in front of very hard choices, also from a moral point of view. If you wonder why, if you come from a background where you say, okay, wars are wrong and we shouldn't be making them, and, have you ever wondered why, probably to you, war is something so, you believe it's so inhumane, right? And therefore it presents with so much more problems. Well, the reason fundamentally is that one, that you're confronted with choices that are not actually in absolute terms more challenging than other ones. We're confronted with daily, and that we don't give that much, right? But it's way more concentrated. So war is also much more easily usable as a scapegoat in that sense. That is to say, that's the worst can happen, right? It's the worst just in relative terms. In absolute terms, there are economical policies that kill, hundreds of thousands times more people than a war, right? But still, they do not arise so much problem, because at that point, if the moral standard is the amount of human lives lost or how they are lost, well, I don't know that putting on, blocking an export and starving hundreds of thousands of people to death, or allowing a product to be sold in the market that causes tumors, but is actually something better than blowing a person up with a bomb, right? I personally don't see it. On the contrary, if you ask me, I prefer a rapid death than suffering the consequences of those other factors. And these things can actually be measured, right? That's the interesting thing. There is a context, though, of course, we can't eliminate, that in fact takes into consideration the pragmaticity of this reality, but this doesn't make it better for who wants to criticize war, because it actually admits that those moral standards are pretty flexible, and moral standards are flexible. At least they are flexible in comparison to certain fixed standards, right? It's like human rights, right? Let's be honest. I'm for human rights. I have no problems with that. But how many people do actually care about the fact that we live maybe in worlds where human rights are respected, and we fixate on other rights that are kind of slightly less important? At least if we make an enormous deal, politically speaking, for where out there in the world. Of course, we've done astonishing better in the last decade, something unprecedented, like the sheer improvement of living conditions. It's been the largest in the history of mankind. But still, we don't give a damn if children are regularly raped and abused in certain societies and culture, if women are mutilated regularly in the genitalia, or there is slavery, there is sex slaves, prostitution, drug deals, children soldiers. It's all out there, right? But let's be honest, nobody gives a shit, and it seems to me that exactly the people who make a fuss about namely at least about human rights, are exactly the ones that are most grossly ignorant and immoral under this point of view, because they don't give absolutely a damn about the rest. It's like it's even worse than a monofactual explanation, right? It's like those people say, I want to solve the killing of animals, for example, by not buying meat. Well, okay. I see that, there is a connection. But if you actually care about saving animals' lives, technically there is a lot of other things you shouldn't be doing, like even buying, a cloth instead than another, or buying a cloth in the first place actually kills animals. So where's your standard that, and I mean not animal, made clothes, but properly, just the economical choice of whether you take a Coke or a Sprite actually kills living beings in ways that where's your moral standard? What is also the kind of animals that for you are okay to kill, get killed, or shouldn't we kill animals at all? What's your positions on the fauna containment in certain environments for even the survival of other species? These are all very complicated problems, and I don't think that just because you don't buy meat actually you're going to make such a huge impact. It's just for world good. That there are much broader issues that for a person that loves animals can be addressed profitably. Maybe have nothing to do even with the alimentary chain. I mean with the breeding thing for for meat consumption, things like that. So I guess to this point, like half of my audience hates because I've thrown literally some of the worst, the hottest topics at some level. But that just for saying, okay, we should be a bit more serious about what we interpret and how and why, right? Um, the acceptability of war naturally can be easily explained just through the concept of not even self-defense, but I mean certain standards that are, of course, um, you know, um, pretty much agreed by the majority. Because at the end of the day, it's a political problem, right? It's not something you can measure scientifically. It's at least about the opinions of the people. For example, pacifistic positions tend to be found easily in political environments where there is a fierce anti-fascism, right? So how do you explain, for example, World War II? That is to say, what should have the Western Allies done in there? Should they have not gone at war with Nazi Germany? They should have let the Holocaust happen. What's the position there? What's your standard there? What is the military worth? Why do we have them? Why, by the way, literally all human societies developed a military instrument and maintained there for the sake of their own. They say, well, because there may be a defensive war. Well, yeah, but let's assume you're one country and your neighbor is being invaded by someone and exterminated in the worst possible genocidal way. What's your point? I remain on defensive. I won't step into that guy's country because it's bad to. What's your standard there? Not having boots on someone else's ground, right? Or is it because you still believe that defense is like the key for winning? That is, if everybody defended their own countries, that nobody could ever win wars against them, or at least that there would be an intrinsic freezing of war. It doesn't work like that. If that had been the case from a strategical point of view, humans would have already done it by far, and they have done it, right? And it turns out it doesn't work like that, especially in today's times where no country's military is fundamentally autonomous in terms of actual equipment, but especially and supply, material and so on. But aside from that, it's simply war is not war. It's not war from a material point of view. That's just the instrument you use. What you have to hit in war is the political will of the enemy to go on fighting, and that can depend on things that have basically nothing to do even with strategical advantages. Isolationism, another serious problem there, that is to say, okay, you know what, since we screwed up some war around the world, we shouldn't be on anybody's soil anymore, because that's the good strategical advice, right? We are competent, smart, intelligent people. Well, that's probably one of the single most stupid positions you can have. And unfortunately, that is coming back. That is to say, at that point, you should deny World War II. You should deny any type of war that was aimed at, saving somebody from an invasion, from an abuse of some sort. I agree, we decide what kind of a thing it is there, but I think it's in fact much more interesting to determine such a thing than to make it in the enormous complication of political, military, and social matters, that the only criterion is not to step on someone else's ground. I think even a child understands that that has nothing to do with reality. But this is also very political. Sometimes there are countries that actually that echo more with this stuff, and other countries kind of copy that. It's kind of funny how even in Europe we get to think through American ideas, declare, of course, that we're I'm actually a fan of the U.S. I have no problem with the broader model that they represent. Of course, there are problems there, as there are pretty serious ones, like there are anywhere. But at the same time, this realization confirms kind of the passivity of certain other countries that very often are kind of even more nationalist than the average, or that they're proud or more sometimes even butthurt than others for some political, in fact, also military-related reasons. That, however, from the top of their great nationalistic pride, just copy passively, cultural models from foreign countries, and do not even understand what the deal about their own is at the end of the day. This is everyday history, right? Go look. I can't name specific countries in this sense, but I just mentioned the United States for the sake of isolationism, because that's kind of in the world, I'd say that the most evident source of that, even historically. Think about before World War II or World War I, but this broader attitude that they should have not cared about the outside, and this is an idea that is coming back, not just there, but by reflection in other countries as well. It's very easy to read. I've read, every war is wrong except the one from defending your country. Why? So if you start committing genocide in your own country, it's fine, as long as you don't step in someone else's, so nobody can bomb you, and it's actually fine to fight pro-genocide in that case. That's how meager. You see, I'm talking by experience in the sense that I know that there are lots of people that do not reason like that. I know that there are people who have studied these things in a lifetime that have also much more way more sophisticated ideas than mine. But I don't know exactly how many opinions of this kind I've read here and there in tens of years. The question is, the average I've been presented with young people, middle-aged people around the world to this information is that there is basically zero awareness of these topics. And that's the most common mistakes that you come across with an astonishing frequency, right? Here, not even discussing nationalistic policies, positions, because those are also, through the roof at this point. Sadly enough, there is a disgusting resurgence of these ideas. I actually know why, and maybe we'll explain at some point, because that is also great proof of weakness. It's a regression in civilization, and never think that civilization is about making less wars, right? That's another dialectical thing. That's a typically culturalist position. That is bullshit. That is the idea that civilization equates to more, to pacifistic ideals. That's absolutely wrong. Look at the history of mankind. Does it seem to you that, yes, we have improved, we are more pacific as cultures? There are also contingent factors telling to mitigate a little bit the situation, but there would be actually more important. But does it seem to you that our militaries have become less powerful, less devastating? No, right? And actually one reason why we make less wars is exactly that one, right? That we would wipe each other out. And that's not because that's the ultimate aim of mankind. That's simply a contingent realization. So no improvement of that ground. It doesn't seem to me that we have conferred power and responsibilities to ever more bloodthirsty people. That is what we did in the age of tribes, and there is no pride even nationalistically speaking, to look at that world. I find disgusting, for example, this ridiculous, by the way, even just from in terms of historical awareness, coming back to the concept of warriorhood, right? This fact that our military in the 21st century should be about warriors. We're not primitives. There is a reason why we have soldiers and citizen soldiers now, and not warriors. Warriors were people who fought for their own charisma, for subjugating others, that considered defeated people non-human beings. That is the world from which warriorhood comes in a nutshell. Today, we fight because we have a pretty clear understanding of the rational capacity of mankind to deliver ever more effective blows that of course have crushed warriors under our heels a long time ago now, and we were the same ones revolted from warriors, so that made them over them, so that there is no intrinsic superiority. On the contrary, a great inferiority of warriorhood over rationale. This is something that the Greeks already understood. When you look at Hellenic mythology, who wins according to you between Athena and Ares, and like all the time they fight. I don't even answer you the question, and that is true because history has concretely showed this more than abundantly. But still, there is the sense that war is, that attitude comes exactly from people that actually boast more kind of understanding about warriorhood. No, because there's a difference between the soldier and the warrior, right? The soldier is just a guy that can even be a very good one, but there's the warrior out there. There's just the one who goes to war, does stuff. Yeah, okay. How? Because the capacities of a warrior, nobody denies from an individual point of view, but if we confront it with, collective military systems that work today, I mean, if the warrior wishes to fight, the way he's used is literally the first guy to be wiped out. So either you didn't study history very well, or you actually do not know much about warfare, and that actually comes in pair. But especially the acknowledgement there is that you don't come even close to have tried. That is, you are just part of this emotionalistic trail of people who look at war and freak out, and they need to start punching their chest like chimps, and because they get that reveals a big deal of indiscipline and of incapacity to actually control yourself in what it is exactly what you're supposed to do in war at every damn single time, and to learn the value of obedience, of order, of following those orders, not just going out there by yourself. Doesn't matter how confident or even maybe predisposed you are for that task, right? There would be more to expand here, because we know that there are also certain typologies. Warriors do exist, right? There is a psychological predisposition for taking action, but it's not fundamentally warriorhood as we intended. It's even improper to have addressed it in this way, but still, that kind of greater predisposition is usually for psychological reasons, either your upbringing and or even psychiatric issues. Still, that can make of you a good, a leader of a couple of men. Could be a good platoon commander. It doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell anything about you being competent as a commander in the first place, right? And that is also the mistake is often done. Part of the reason why this happens is that, of course, as we were saying, people do not study war. They're mostly exposed in today's years to just a cinematographic idea of war that focuses fundamentally on the individuality. That is, it's always this kind of video game first-person perspective of improbable things happening all at once to shock you and to make you feel amazed by this visual effects and so on, and that's war, right? That's the other. War is something way more devastating, and at levels that cannot be depicted that have not much to do with that kind of impact, but that are to be carefully studied even on the base of other psychological dimensions that in fact are also very poorly represented by that same art that doesn't render at all what it's really the deal. Part of the reason is that we have, of course, put the ideal world aside, that is the world of spirit, the world of the moral dimensions. We do not understand that it's actually the moral dimension there that makes the difference in war rather than the technical one. We think that war is just about pulling that damn trigger or thinking it's a matter of weapons or technology. These are the most common mistakes. Usually young people mostly do, but even most people remain young people, mentally speaking, throughout all, doesn't matter how old they are, and that perpetrate this idea that war is fundamentally just the exposure to that, right? I remember when I was a kid, I thought about this. I thought like that. I mean, the idea, you talk about war, you heard about the fact that, wars had happened in your family. You were thinking about World War II, and what did you understand there of broader political issues of why those happened, why they were done, what is the practice of doing, what's the cost, what's how much a society is up to is to pay for it. No, for you, war is just this kind of nebulous thing that invests you, and that is so terrible, so shocking, and you basically look just from an individual point of view. Well, that's the same pretty standard approach to the thing. For people, it's not just even why it happens, it's just the fact that it happens that is so bad that surpasses everything else. Once again, it doesn't matter whether societies on a regular basis kill way more people in other preventable way. It must be war, right? You can't again kill tens of thousands of people just by lowering or hiring certain insurances standards, regulations. But if you blow up 20 people with a bombardment, by chance, it's the single most terrible thing that can ever happen. I don't want to insist much on this kind of body count, let's say, standard, but I just do it to respond to mostly what the most average criterion is: how many people's lives were saved, which makes sense, right? Of course, there is, though, something extra to it that is, it's not much about the damage caused, but how certain things are carried out, right? It's like, it's the difference that exists between killing, an innocent civilian, for example, and killing, an hostile military man that is shooting at you. I mean, that's obviously a different thing, and we all understand that there is a difference there. Still, it's a killed person, but it's different in context. Why? Guess why? You can get there because there is somebody was sent that guy to shoot at you, whereas the innocent civilian might have even supported, actually, those guys were fighting against you, but at the end of the day, with much less force than a guy armed that's shooting at you. And that guy armed shooting at you is most likely not doing it on his own. There is something behind him that is much greater and that you're fighting against for some greater reason. That objectively has been calculated to be worth fighting for. That is to say, it's quite unlikely that wars are fought with no prospect of victory or gain, right? That's another mistake people do. They believe that wars can be carried out scientifically to know in advance, fundamentally, what they're gonna be worth. War obviously should be fought in that prospect, and especially knowing how to achieve it, which is the most difficult part. That's where average people, unfortunately or fortunately, actually have a very few to say competently. But war happens to be actually the human activity that, for given the odds, what is at stake, it is gonna result in the most different outcomes that you could prospect before. So, surprise, surprise, if wars are fought in the first place, it's because there is somebody from the other side that thinks can resist, right? Otherwise, there are other means, right? Countries can take over others politically speaking. It's quite easy to do. If there is not enough resistance. So whoever puts up the resistance, there's not the myth of the army, the country that is doomed, that fights because they're stupid or fanatic. There is something definitely they can expect, they can get, even defeat, right? But not quite. I mean, that's in fact the subjectivity in victory and defeat that we were speaking of before. Another important aspect of accepting the fact that wars are an option is that most people are not competent about waging in the first place. The theory of the art of war is something extremely complex. It takes a lifetime either of direct military experience in places of command, of certain responsibility, that is, and this is also unfortunate to say, and I will surely offend somebody, but I have a great respect for the military, as you can understand. But again, and I can tell, having had even just, we all had somebody in the military in our family, in our past, in some way, participating direct hand from that individual perspective, or saying before, in a war, can naturally make this person aware of what that means to see it, to have an opinion. But unfortunately, without any further, let's say, studying or learning or understanding about the broader situation, that doesn't tell you much about what that war is. That is, to having participated to a war, unless you were in positions of substantially high command, has a very few to do with you understanding the needs of, and the means of fighting a war. This is unfortunate, but it's true. I mean, we all share that political responsibility. We all share that that choice of even obeying your authority or not, right? There are many conscience objectors that decided not to fight. It's difficult to judge sometimes, but it's pretty obvious that, again, serving National Socialism or fascism or communism is maybe quite of a debatable choice that was always to be avoided, if possible. How? Maybe through being killed yourself, yes, but maybe you would have not killed other 10 people out there serving those regimes, right? Then, and confront some objective conscience that even was maybe fighting against these regimes, that, however, from the other side decided not to fight. Maybe that surely may have prevented, saving lives and therefore doing something positive in that sense. But also, maybe it's important for a society that there are certain people who remind us that we don't have to blindly even follow, in fact, authority, and that there is still to think about the licity of fighting a war, because it's a big thing, right? And an individual conscience can be shattered by that, and the fact that we have conscience objectors in certain, that there were in certain countries, while in others they were, decomposing fundamentally, speaks also for the difference in political responsibility when it comes to the employ of the military in that sense. The same goes for a democratic point of view. That is to say, of course, direct democracies, fortunately, do not work, never worked, right? We do not live in societies where, like, choices are made by, like, every single governmental choice is made by 50% plus one people of the community directly on every single issue. No, we vote representatives to work on our behalf on things that most of the time we don't even understand, but that we constantly complain about. And therefore, we have developed naturally what's the most convenient, the most effective mean of government, that is a hierarchy with more or less competent individuals who are placed in positions of command, of rule, and that carry the thing out for us. And if you wonder why we have things like, for the military, military academies, why the highest authority of the states are, in charge of the thing, why there is so much emphasis on responsibility, on the following of these very careful rules of engagement and so on. The question is, our societies have fundamentally acknowledged what war is, right? And the same reason why we actually arrived to this point is largely due to the fact that we had, even just preemptively, to think to fight wars, right? We all know, studying the history of mankind, that wars are potentially the best destroyers of human societies, but also some of the greatest makers of civilizations, and as cultural hybridizers, right? There is a constant learning that we have, and exactly for that asymmetry that we were talking about before. Every time we fight, we learn something from our enemies. That is, that tells you also how more unpredictable things are. That is, there's not a standard pack of military capacities that you can employ against someone, thinking that someone will remain passive to it or will be fundamentally a mathematical draw. No, that's a living being that will react to you, will adapt, and you can't. This is not a deterministic system for you to be sorted out before war is over. And what it means to be that a war is over, that can't be even spotted. But when is a conflict over? What is our capacity of understanding that conflict won't end? This is not excuse to say, okay, let's not fight wars, because wars are not conflicts. Conflicts are always there, and the best thing you can do to even prevent senseless wars is to study conflict and to try to prevent it, with means that are going to be violent, because violence is nothing but a tool, right? And that we, as human societies, very far from behaving like primitives who just wanted to make war using violence for the sake of it. And even there was a context where it was functional. Even warriors there were like the way we describe, because that world forced them to be like that, way more than our world forces us to be in any way. And this realization should make us way more responsible. And on the contrary, our societies, our policies have extremely carefully handled the military instrument, right? The more imposing, the more dangerous, right? The most destructive it has come to be, right? And this is how you can paradoxically even trust some of the worst, governments out there, because that's something that goes beyond a mere culturalist attitude of saying, it's just evil, bloodthirsty, maniacal guy at the top that wants to destroy everything. History tells us that it's not quite the case, that even, the worst tyrants in the history of mankind, at the end of the day, were following patterns that were pretty feasible, pretty pragmatical, right? Pretty achievable in some sense. There could be major shortcomings of intelligence of the military at the same time. Think about, Hitler and the Eastern Front. Nobody denies that, Hitler is a negative figure, I would say. Nobody denies that the Wehrmacht lost the Eastern on the Eastern Front for simply a gross logistical miscalculation and underestimation of simply the sheer amount of Soviet divisions. But at the same time, the German military at the time was the most competent in the world. It's the only one that could do that properly. Here, the most competent in the world, it could be debatable, actually, because here, in fact, when we go to connect it with the political chain, we don't have to underestimate, in that case, Nazi Germany. But in terms of actual doctrine, well, if there was anybody who could try to invade the Soviet Union at that point, were the Germans, and they screwed up, right? So this is not for anybody to say, I would have done better, because at that time, nobody had ever tried that. They were the ones who had the best data, and they screwed up anyway. But, if you pick Poland, if you pick France, those were things that you, as a gambling as war is, well, they were actually achieved on a pattern that, yes, was driven by a sick maniacal ideology of genocidal, in fact, nature and of scale of extermination. But so that is consistently, I have no doubt. From an ideological point of view, it's by far the worst we have met. Like, as even, absolutely not sympathetic of communist regimes as I am, still, communists, they even killed more. There's no doubt about that. But the ways they killed were different from the ones that the Nazis actually achieved. On a scale of difference, of course, that many things were perfectly the same, and there is no commendation of neither of the both of them. But the question is, even in there is a political dimension. That is the one that you have to look at. It's not the fact that there might have been a war in Europe at that time in another situation. The fact that even the Western world had fundamentally allowed Germany to seize other countries, that therefore there was a political problem in the West as well, that there was definitely a situation that we have began to read like, in a also, for example, overestimating the Germans. I mean, after World War II, we made a kind of a complete rewriting for the sake of Western unity and and other political reasons, also detached from the Cold War, in part. That is to redraw basically the role, the identity, the capacities of all the contendants in those war. Right, so that there are these standard prejudices about countries having a fixed capacity of World War II is truly to be rewritten, not in in the evenemential sense, but in the actual judgment of the military capacities of the broader strategical culture of these things. We have underestimated. I think we have underestimated the British. We have underestimated the Americans. We have grossly overestimated the Germans, the Japanese, enormously. Even when you take countries like France or Italy, we have basically given this stereotypical thing, you were good for nothing, but there is much more to be seen even in the strategical balance, even as the same, not just the military, but properly the role of those countries in even working for the Axis, broadly meant even as working force in the industry and so on. These are calculations we hardly do, right? We have also depicted the Soviets just as a bunch of beggars who went to war. They were, it wasn't like that. Even it doesn't matter how harsh the Stalinist regime actually and disgusting it was, but even the myth of not a step backwards of mass killings of Soviet soldiers. We have been studying archives now. It doesn't seem to have happened the way it was mostly journalistically told after the war, because of course we were in the Cold War and necessarily we were concerned about the communists, but still that's the point. It's political. It's not something that should bring us, in fact, as it's happened, to misjudge war. And talking about World War II is exactly this is exactly the point. I mean, it's realizing that the most impacting war in the history of mankind, and the one that is still so close to us after all, would be a beautiful testing ground for our democratic culture, for our historical understanding, our civic duty, and still we fail dramatically to even framing it correctly, right? And why? Well, fundamentally because we don't study it. Coming to terms with the acceptability of war, as we were saying, doesn't mean to be pro-war making. It has to be pro-war as a political option. That is to say, okay, green light to the idea that we should be armed in case something messed up happens, and that we can resort to that mean with the necessary competence for handling it. And you would think it's kind of just a word, but what we try to when we try to describe broader military dynamics on Schwerpunkt in the history videos, we objectively come to the objective evidence along the Clausewitz in theory that all these problems are political. That is to say, there's not a standard military that once you create remains intact, as we were saying before, and therefore you can employ it as if it was like Rizik or a video game, where you have that standard amount of troops and you can't send them their own alike, they will respond to your command and so on. Handling the military requires a broader political and social commitment. That is to say, if you refuse war and even just funding to the military for actual strategical needs that your country may have, you are actually damaging your same political independence in a sense, your democratic culture. I mean, the fact that if you want to be just in this world, you will have to use force. What kind of war? Even just, we know that war is just a duel on a large scale. What kind of war would it be without security forces, without police, without justice, right? Of course, there's plenty of fanatics out there would say we shouldn't have that. Well, good luck to you. It would be funny to see how those societies would function, or better, not function like. And we know from actual shortcomings of some, because the world is big enough to have created some crazy guy who once wanted to create something like that, and we know that it's an overwhelming exception, or better, I mean the fact that it's nobody is so crazy almost to think something like that, and when in fact it does happen, it's ruinous. The same goes for the world, that is still not a state, it still doesn't have a proper police around, and therefore states are kind of more likely to have frictions against each other, to clash, to play on levels that are of great scale, that can encompass entire countries, their futures, and so on, and therefore we need that kind of force to be employed. What's wrong with this? I frankly do not understand. Right? It's all people. Another point people would make is, but if everybody just thought about working hard and not about, stealing other people's stuff, and the problem is that, would there be peace, right? Because certain people at least pretend that war is the evil guy that ruins the party to everybody, and it's the usual primitive barbarian inhuman idiot that has to use violence. This is typical culturist thought. No, just see first of all, what kind of person are you to pretend that you're not like that? Because I presume that a person who doesn't question constantly the righteousness of or known action, doesn't have doubts of conscience whatsoever, is actually a pretty dangerous person, and that realization comes from the fact that we all have this kind of problems. So imagine in something so big like the world, communally speaking, just think about the free market and think about the various streaks and difficulties and losses and competition and so on, and distance and kind of it would be better to live in a world where everybody was nicer and fairer, but you cannot eliminate differences at certain levels. You cannot have a single way of thinking, and nobody doubts that there is a better one and a worse one, and nobody doubts even that the world has become by far a better place over time, and there's surely room for improvement, but it doesn't seem to me that we are in the condition of putting an end to conflict that is intrinsic in human societies at every second. Look at even within the same states, right? We're not talking about, think about different opposed political positions. Yes, that kind of hatred and perennial, hostility is kind of dumb, because people are ignorant. That's I agree. That's the first reason, but it's fundamentally, as you understand there, not a moral problem. I mean, it's a moral problem in as much as a cognitive problem at the end of the day. That is, the more you know about how to employ violence, and the more you tend to calibrate better its employment, that it turns out to be, useless most of the times. It turns out war most of the times is a bad idea. That is, given that we have said that war is on the table always as an option, well, it turns out most cases which, we leave are do not require that kind of use, right? But to pretend that human nature will be devoid of conflict, that there will be at some point people that will not have differences and nothing to fight for, some injustice to fix, and so on. It's unrealistic. At least at that point, I think there should be we could go as far. There would have to be as far as a biological change in our genetical structure to cause that kind of equilibrium, or at least we should live, or conversely, we should live in ways that basically prevent us any kind of initiative that is unrealistic. Therefore, it's not saying there is nothing to justify in our time. Let's say not burying the hatchet, but literally destroying the hatchet and remain disarmed for the sake of avoiding using that hatchet. Because if you want to kill someone and that moment will arrive, even punches will do, right? And they will do much less functionally than an hatchet. So nobody here discusses about the actual reasons why you're going to do that. Because guess what? Those reasons are unpredictable. Unpredictable, like even the outcome, the fact that that problem will present itself in the first place, right? Ask strategical analysts. What do you think they study? They study wars that could be fought in 30 years from now. They study wars that can be fought 4 months from now. Because beyond that timeline, they basically have no idea what can happen. I mean, it becomes so speculative for all things that can change in the world that it doesn't make sense for them to invest resources in trying to sort out what will happen. And that is a scientific criterion. That is, in fact, how our governments, our military works on, right? Of course, we plan. This is in terms of what can concretely happen. You know, in a kind of an alert state. Of course, there are arming plans that last for decades, for generations, and so on. But even in there, everything is going to be updated constantly, right? Everything gets changed, everything gets modified, because the context changes, and as humans, we should get acquainted to this concrete realization that any ideology, such as pacifism, that indulges into kind of a fixed standard that should be like that point, end of the story, is not functional to human life. It's not functional to human reality, to political and social reality. We do not work like that, and we would all like to live without wars. I can't imagine there may be someone that would like to live constantly in a perpetual state of war. I don't know. I have difficulties to think about that. But overwhelmingly, I think we don't like war at all. I don't, right? But this doesn't mean, exactly for that reason, that we should underestimate what we can do about it, which turns out to be exactly because war is designed to force you to be forced to fulfill someone else's will. That turns out that in order to counter that, you should have the same means available, right? Knowing how to respond. And this is not even just a matter of armament or being ready or having a competent military. This is about the political choice that in democratic realities we all have. In part, right, we have this enormous gift of, even as incompetent people, to have a say on what should be actually done. And as we've seen, democratically, well, we let World War II start in the first place. So that should be a reminder of how easy it is to get mistaken, even in a world that is objectively better. Even when we're dealing with brutes, with criminals, with somebody that only apparently is less dangerous, right? And we all know how, unfortunately, intelligence is, fortunately, is more important than force, but still, who uses force has an intelligence to deliver it at the same time. And it's through that realization that, how easy it is, how risky it is just to be alive, to live among other humans. We know it, sadly, from everyday experience. And that's the reason why we allow violence to be exercised in certain contexts. We accept to be armed. Also, this must be not an excuse to use that without a need. Right. In this video, I could go easily against even the conceptions people who justify the armament of population for the sake of countering tyranny. I'm sorry. The fact that there is a gun in every house, this has nothing to do with you even coming remotely close to be able to counter an invasion or a coup. Right. The military is designed to crush this kind of resistance, but more than that, it's not about the potential of your guns. It's about your political will to use them. Right, owning a gun and being a responsible citizen, or being strategically educated, or having a realistic understanding of of military issues are completely different things. And people who are meant to be competent about this and who actually are, spend a consistent amount of their lives to understand, studying these things in order to understand how they function. How can an average person understand that? These are complex things, right? And the trick there, the lie there that is used both by pacifists and militarists, or whatever you want to call them broadly meant, is that instead the game is easy, right? It just takes to do that and everything will be fixed. It just takes either to have arms or not to have arms to solve problems. It doesn't, or to whatever other stupid thing that is to say, not to step on someone else's ground, or everything has a meaning that is contextualized, and you can't make this kind of generalizations and pretend that reality will respond to you positively just because of that. There are things that tendentially work, others that don't, but that's not an extreme as well. That's just an average. That's an absolute, but an average, it's relative. This is the point I would like to stress. What else can I say about the coming to terms with the acceptability of war? Well, at a broader spiritual, because I guess people who loathe war and as we were saying, have to be listened to, right? Doesn't matter the mistakes they do. Doesn't matter what they are. The dreaded culturalists who invent that basically wars exist just because there are a bunch of more violent people in society that brings others to then engulf them in wars and cause senseless massacres. It doesn't work like that. That's another thing we explain a lot of times, right? It is true that sometimes a person can make the difference, but that would have not ever been possible if other people hadn't rendered it possible, as a matter of fact. So never think that it's the tyrant's fault if something happens. It's the tyrant's fault in at least the majority of the forces of the people. Let's put it in this way. We don't even want to make it quantitatively in the number of people, but properly. No country in the world has ever been led by a single person. It has always been led by the majority of the forces of the country that allowed to go at war. What does this mean in practice? Also that there can be just, maybe not one people, but 10 people that decide that? Not even. Because there's no instance in human societies, other countries of our country's size and proportionally that could be dragged into war just by 10 people, right? You need millions to do that, right? And those millions are equally responsible, and they are equally responsible even if when they do not go at war and let genocide happen, let instability unfold, and for what at the end of the day? Because you just want to play video games closed in your room and not listening to the news of what is happening in the world you live in, instead of educating yourself. Well, it doesn't sound very, the recipe for good consequences. Let's put it in this way, right? So this is also to be understood that your choices regarding war, if they're not backed by an actual understanding of the broader political, military, and social issues that may bring to a war in a conflict whatsoever, have no importance. That is to say, you stating that war should never be done, well, it doesn't equate to you doing good to human beings. Doesn't actually even have to do with war not happening, because what may happen, you may even influence the process of not going to war, but as I just told, you may actually exasperate some other realities that will make even a greater war, right? And that's how easily it can escalate. And it did happen in the past, right? It always happened. And so these fixed positions are dangerous exactly for that reason. And what one person who expressed them actually show is how short of intellective, more than intellectual capacity they fall, right? They don't see beyond. They literally see a minimal part of what should even be taken into consideration to make a sensible choice on the matter. They don't care. Most people do not care, just as the opposite of them do not care. Right, there are people out there who live basically in the belief, and I've met these people randomly, that people should be exterminated, that other countries should be wiped out, right? I know actual people in Europe, right, but not even in those countries where, I don't know, there's been genocide. I'm not talking necessarily about the, well, okay, and now I won't make examples, but it happened just some time ago. There was, I don't remember where it was. It was a girl from, I don't know, but it passes for one of the most advanced countries in the world. You know, it's those place that there's a paradise, a heaven, kind of a, you know, all happy and rich and no and well, this girl, it's in Europe. This girl said something like, well, okay, well, there is the detail that would actually reveal where, well, okay, maybe not so much, but basically she said that she was proud that her grandparent had fought against the Americans as a volunteer for the Nazis, right, back in the day, and that now the American occupation of Europe is coming, things are turning, right, and she didn't say, of course, in this thing what kind of you know, what would happen. That is to say, okay, we'll just reopen Owens in extermination camps. I mean, I don't know. And this girl was kind of I don't even remember because I didn't talk to her. I just read something about it. And she was like, but I don't remember. Either late teenager or in her early 20s. So, and she seemed like she didn't seem like a disadvantaged person, an unschooled one. But you understand that behind statements like this, surely be the mind of a stupid person, young person, as we all made mistakes or maybe similar. But there is much more than that. There is probably their family that has boosted those ideas. That is, adult, mature people who actually took pride of having been part of a family that where somebody fought for National Socialism against the Americans, killing people for that reason, and that is something we should take proud of for building the future we live in, right? So these are the actual dangers of and I say this as a conservative. So just imagine what is the intrinsic danger we can have. You would say, well, at least a pacifist wouldn't say that. You know, a pacifist would. I don't think so. I think a pacifist would be better spent if he actually changed his mind and countered such stupid idiocies by saying, you know what, we live in a world that has encounters that can deploy a hell of a, you know, of a power thanks to the Atlantic Alliance that has maintained stability in the world from after World War II and frozen a lot of other bloodsheds and genocidal bullshit like the one you're dreaming of, and saved consistently millions and millions alive. And if you dare to think that your country is ever going to do something about it, just that you're the next to be wiped out, that is called deterrence. And believe me, it does work, because if we didn't destroy each other up to this point, paradoxically, it's also because we invented means that doesn't matter how dangerous they are, but basically froze conflicts, exactly because of deterrence, right? And if you want to live in a world where the capacity is to put an end to these silly ideas, unfortunately, I'd say unfortunately, is you have to be able to deliver that deterrence, or at least to also invest in a broader collective education for people to know when to use that deterrence and how, right? Because the easy criticism to this position is saying, well, think about the race for armaments. That's not good. If we went toward that direction, we would basically just invent ever more destructive weapons, and we would end up at some point using them, right? The point is, there is indeed a sensible point for, deposing arms, but the potential for resurgence of such is still informing the strategical balance, right? This is the fascinating aspects that humans tend not to think about in long term, is that exactly themselves tend to underestimate what can happen in the future. That is to say, for better or for worse, right? It's not that if you disarm a guy and say, no, don't do it, it's bad, that guy will listen to you. That there is the guy who doesn't give a damn, and at that point you say, wait, stop, don't do it, stop it, then the guy will become maybe stronger than you and you will simply take you out. So at some point, it doesn't matter, it sounds sad, but you'll have to be in the conditions to knock out the guy first, right? Otherwise he'll do that. And you say, but who decides for it? Doesn't decide anyone, it's up to you. That's what boosts individual responsibility. Simply saying, okay, we shouldn't do it, and okay, now I feel better having said that, and my job in the world is done, means that you're just a lazy ass that doesn't bring any improvement in civilization and doesn't wonder whether what his point is right or wrong, and just leaves it there for others to take advantage of you, ultimately, because that's a pretty weak standpoint. And that denotes a weak moral force. Not just a weak material force, but moral force as the one that in war makes the difference concretely, most of the times. So the point I actually wanted to make about to all those actually good-hearted people, right? Those open-minded people that may disagree with all these points and think that they sound pretty crude and heartless, is that there is really a humanitarian value in this all, right? In using violence. It may sound oxymoric, right? One of the stupidest phrases that I've heard from contestations at times of Vietnam War was something like, fighting for peace is like fucking for virginity. Okay, it's a nice line. I gotta admit that, it gets to it, but that's exactly the mistake exemplified. There is no ratio there. There is no ratio. That is to say, what are you going to do without violence or the threat of it? Are you going to educate people to be better? Like, how do you keep children in schools, for example? Because children every morning all over the world magically flock into schools because they naturally are apt to it. Of course not. That's coerced. They are obliged to do so. Their parents go to serious legal troubles if they don't bring them there. So that's literally an imposition. Impositions means you have to enforce it in a way or another. That means that it's either violently or through the threat of violence or some equivalent, because as we've seen, and here it's sad to say, but even human life in this world, in the broader market, I'm not saying in terms of belief or spirituality, but it has a value, right? We live in society that fundamentally attributes to human life an infinite potential, tendentially, right? So we react constantly like that, but that's ideal. That's just like, let's be honest, that we give everybody the right chance to make a difference, right? And that's very positive. That's also the moral ground which I stand fundamentally for the good of humanity, I believe. But it turns just out that reality is different, that reality works through other ratios, through other standards, right? Human life does have a cost. It's very sad to say, and it's as sad as saying that, I don't know, a random guy in Central Africa has a much lower cost than a guy living, in the most advanced countries. The question there is, who decides that? Nobody. But so it is. And the fact that it is so that makes the difference of what you can do. The rest is just speculation. Right? It's just you sitting wondering about that, and the guy is still being killed like an animal because it's not worth anything. And you doing nothing about that. Well, violence is just a tool like another that has a cost and that therefore is completely equal. You can equate it to money, to action, to whatever, right? So it's not bad in itself. It's just something that has that cost and has that impact in reality. And whether we like it or not, we have to use it. If their solution is good, right? If that brings to the actual solution, I mean, otherwise you can't do that either. Doesn't mean you have to prefer it. As we've said, it's not the most preferable thing. And this is valid also for the conduct of war. Von Clausewitz, we have explained now countless of times how, it's better to have like a direct, firm, harsh, destructive impact immediately in a war than basically diluting and actually expanding this over a much longer time because you're not decisive enough of how to get it done, and more people in absolute terms die for that matter. So always remember this, that proceedings in war are meant to be inhumane. And we should be thankful for that, because if we didn't have that, way more people would die. And that's the reason why humans have always fought wars. Because they have, in a way or another, interiorized or rationalized this, as we have done today. If people just even studied what a Prussian general wrote in the early 19th century, well, that's exactly the point. That's how we solved problems, and it did work. Right? Did this spare us from making more wars? Probably yes. It sounds weird because we know what happened historically in the history of mankind, but at the same time, that is already the reflection that that's a more orderly reality than if it wasn't. And if it wasn't, it wouldn't be properly even human. So technically, that's what we have to cope with. And still, there was an improvement over time. In spite of the increase of destructivity that we have witnessed and we can realize, and we have to stay pretty damn awake because bad things could happen again much sooner than we think, because we're so pretty damn unstable as political and social systems that pretty messed things could happen again. But I'm not even talking about human things. I mean, turns out being hit by asteroid in the last decades has been overwhelmingly reevaluated as something extremely likely and devastating to wipe out human civilization, to regress to that kind of a reality. Well, at that point you won't be listening to my videos, will you? But the point is that it should still make a difference to be aware how to handle a military instrument. And that's why we study war. What do you think we do it for? Because we like it. It's the fascination about responsibility, authority, command, right? What we can do. There is also, a broader attraction towards chaos. That is true. Humans are attracted to chaos, but not to make other chaos. Human psyche is designed to be attracted by chaos, to make sense out of chaos, to put an order there. So the myth that war is inhuman, barbaric, it's completely the opposite of what science tells us under any point of view. But what we know, just psychologically, sociologically, anthropologically, historically, we know we do that. And up to this point, in a gradual, progressive sense, we have, in this time span, actually achieved pretty interesting things under that point of view that worked. And the military is still around. Guess why? Because that is a tool to ensure that stability. So when you think of war as just a negative thing that we should all avoid for some reason, just because it's bad people die, think about these things. Because it doesn't cost you much. They are relatively simple, right? It doesn't take a broader, of course people have studied to get to these conclusions, but we can use them, by understanding them quite simply, in their implications. If somebody gives you, it's time to explain them to you as I'm trying to do, well, it's relatively easy to understand. Believe me, I don't have this dramatic and nor explaining capacity, nor I want to change people's ideas proper, but just to, it's them who should change their own idea. I can't do anything for that. It's always up to you, right? And already reasoning in that defensive sense is a very conflictual. If you want to rational, it's the same attitude that brings you nowhere when you see people who want to use violence for no good reason, right? So in this sense, I think we will. There is a positive message that can be thrown out there. That naturally will get poisoned by the broader motivations about these topics that is not military, in fact. People ignore that. They don't even know how it works practically at that level. It's political, right? And that's what makes military things happen. So it's obvious that if you hate to death one country because you think it should have never bombed the other country, and you you basically built all your existence about that. Well, that's pretty sad, but and you will disagree, right? But there is maybe a chance you can give to yourself to maybe say, okay, well, maybe there is something that can make me live better, and not by ignoring, but on the contrary, to take ever more concretely into consideration the actual reality for what it is, and not for what I wished, because I feel the sense of injustice. This is the interesting thing. That's why I presume that these ideas can have a breakthrough, because we all want things to go well at the end of the day. We can be mean and evil, and we can be the worst, right? But at the same time, there is some good in us, and that good has the magic capacity of making us doing things better, for the better, right? For good. And that should be cultivated. And war offers you an enormous variety of evidence in this sense. I mean, it's not... that's why I say that people properly do not know about... that do not know about war are mostly into this kind of ideas. Because it's literally an unknown topic. People do not study this. Where do our children acquainted these discourses since an early age? Is there any popular, is there any media, any author, any thinker that focuses on this, that explains why some of the most shocking things in the history of mankind that should all be interested in them is kind of somewhat censored, or it's strange, because we know that we are interested in war, whether we like it or not. To take these positions, they're normally very hard, very polarizing, so even if there is an interest in there. So why do we... The answer is cultural in part, but at the end of the day, it's also still up to us. We can't blame broader reasons just for what we can individually do. It can be hard to fix that. It can be, a challenge. I don't know. I've been acquainted to these things relatively early, so maybe for me it's easy to have built this standards a bit and sticking around. But a person maybe my same age, I've never heard about these things, may say, well, it's too difficult for me to change my mind. It doesn't conform to all the things I've based, I don't know, my own, sense of, my confidence, my person, my identity. It's a problem, because as we all have, we all made mistakes. It's never too late actually to change things, but it's increasingly more difficult sometimes, the more times go on actually. But still, this doesn't mean we can't do better. And that effort we should make for ourselves, not for others, if we are really concerned about that. And surely doing things well for yourself does help others a big deal, right? I presume this is a nice introduction to the topic, at least aside from the clumsy, unsketched, synoptical attitude that I have here, proceeding that I have. But I'd say that it's extendable also to other fields as well, because war, they all encompass war, even just in potential, and therefore we know it's gonna be useful at so many other levels. Well, for now we stop here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.